On the 3rd day of July, 1863, as cannon fire tore the sky over Gettysburg, a woman walked through the smoke who did not belong to the hour, the age, or perhaps even the world of men. Soldiers later swore she appeared untouched by the chaos around her white dress unsoiled, eyes sharp and still, as if she had stepped through the curtain of time itself. Her name, whispered in confusion among the wounded, was Elizabeth Caldwell. To the dying, she was an angel. To the living, a mystery. To history, an anomaly buried and redacted by the institutions sworn to record truth. Witnesses would testify that they had seen her before decades earlier unchanged. The same smooth face, the same green eyes, the same precise voice reciting prayers for the condemned. It was not merely resemblance. It was identity, documented, signed, and dated. When military surgeons attempted to include her in the official field reports of Gettysburg's aftermath, their accounts were quietly removed. The U.S. Army Medical Department sealed her file under a classification that would not surface again until the late 20th century. Within that file was a single phrase scrawled across the cover in fading ink: Chronological Displacement, Case 3A. In the decades that followed, researchers who stumbled upon her trail would disappear into the labyrinth of government archives, only to reemerge silent or discredited. Hospitals where she once worked reported missing records. Family graves bore no aging photographs. Her name existed, but her timeline did not. For those few who have traced the fragments, letters, diary entries, affidavits, a disturbing picture emerges. A woman who defied entropy itself. Not merely uniged, but exempt from the progression of decay that defines biological life. And the closer one looks, the clearer it becomes that Elizabeth Caldwell's condition was not a miracle, but a design. Because buried beneath the Civil War's carnage lies a different kind of experiment, one conducted not with bullets or flags, but with time itself. Tonight, we reopen that sealed file. We'll follow her from Baltimore's cobblestone streets to the hidden corridors of military medicine. And by the end, you will understand why this case was erased and why certain names were never meant to be spoken aloud again. Baltimore, 1840. A city of ambition and disease, where the scent of the harbor mixed with smoke from factory chimneys and the soft rot of summer heat. Here, under the respectable veneer of gaslit streets and marble row houses, the city's medical elite dissected corpses by candlelight, desperate to prove that science alone could master life and death. It was here that Dr. Cornelius Hartwell, a rising physician of anatomical studies, first met the woman who would undo his understanding of both. Elizabeth Caldwell entered his practice on Charles Street one autumn evening, describing nothing more alarming than fatigue and sleeplessness. She appeared to be in her late 20s, well-kept, educated, with the bearing of someone accustomed to privilege. Her husband, Thomas Caldwell, a merchant in the Chesapeake shipping trade, accompanied her politely. Nothing about the couple drew suspicion, but Hartwell was a man obsessed with precision. His patient records were mathematical, his measurements meticulous. And over the next 10 years, those numbers refused to move. No changes in facial structure, no wrinkling of the hands, no loss of bone density, no physiological drift toward age. At first, he questioned his instruments, then his sanity. Each year, he recalibrated his devices, re-examined his notes, compared them to hospital records. But the result was always identical. Elizabeth Caldwell was not aging. By 1850, her appearance was identical to the day she first entered his clinic. Colleagues dismissed the claim as obsession, the symptom of a doctor seeking immortality through his patients. But when other physicians examined her during childbirth, illness, and injury, they recorded the same impossibility. Even the family's Presbyterian minister wrote in his diary that Mrs. Caldwell remains in the grace of youth while all others wither in God's time. The whispers began quietly, among the wives of Baltimore's social elite, that Mrs. Caldwell dabbled in forbidden European treatments, that her beauty was purchased through unnatural means. Some said she had made a pact, others that she was the victim of one. By 1855, her case was circulating through private medical correspondence under the code name Subject V. Those letters would never appear in any public journal. They vanished along with the men who wrote them, because by then, the anomaly had drawn attention from those who studied not medicine but control. By the mid-1850s, Elizabeth Caldwell was no longer just a curiosity. She had become a variable, a data point that defied decay in a world built on it. And when something cannot decay, the systems that govern mortality begin to take notice. Dr. Hartwell's quiet case study found its way into a confidential packet sent to the Maryland State Medical Society under the heading Aberrations of Senescence. He expected ridicule. What he received was silence. Weeks later, men from Washington arrived at his clinic. They did not identify themselves as doctors. They requested every record, every drawing, every page of his private notes. Their justification: national interest in the physiological extremes of the human body. Hartwell surrendered the files. Within a month, his name disappeared from medical directories. His correspondence stopped. His home was sold to an unknown buyer. Around the same time, the Caldwell's neighbors began to notice men posted near the family's townhouse. Well-dressed, well-armed, never speaking. Mrs. Caldwell herself withdrew from public gatherings, her attendance at church becoming rare. And when she did appear, parishioners whispered that she seemed frightened, as if she knew something vast and unseen had marked her. But science does not let miracles rest. In 1858, a letter surfaced from a surgeon stationed at Fort McHenry describing a woman of constant youth, undergoing measurements of blood resilience under stress conditions. The handwriting matched that of Dr. Hartwell, though the signature was different. Behind the facade of progress, the United States was quietly building its first Bureau of Physiological Research, a forerunner to the institutions that would one day control not just medicine but memory. Their goal was not to understand Elizabeth Caldwell. It was to replicate her. By 1860, 3 medical witnesses connected to her examinations had died. 2 of apoplexy, 1 of an unexplained fire in his study. Hospital logs for their patients were destroyed. The Baltimore Medical Journal published a statement dismissing all reports as mythic and non-verifiable. Yet private minutes from the Society's March meeting included a single sentence, underlined in red ink. The Caldwell subject continues unaltered. Her pattern must not become public. And so the anomaly became a secret, not erased, just moved, hidden beneath the language of research, behind sealed drawers and shifting signatures. Because those who witnessed her had discovered something far more dangerous than immortality. A breach in the laws that keep men obedient to time. War has always been the perfect cover for forbidden science. When the first shots echoed across Fort Sumter in 1861, laboratories that once dissected theory began dissecting men. The Civil War was not only a conflict of ideology, it was a vast field experiment in physiology, trauma, and endurance. And in that chaos, the anomaly known as Elizabeth Caldwell became property of the state. Thomas Caldwell's shipping firm, once neutral, was seized under federal wartime contract. Manifests that once listed cargo now listed names. Human cargo volunteers for what the War Department termed longevity adaptation trials. The signatures on those orders belonged to a branch newly formed within the Army Medical Department Section 13, its existence never publicly acknowledged. Witnesses would later claim that Elizabeth was not abducted but summoned. A letter bearing the War Department seal arrived at her Baltimore townhouse requesting her assistance in field medicine. She accepted, perhaps believing she could serve the wounded as she had before. But when she reached the camps outside Washington, she found herself among physicians who did not ask questions, only drew blood. Her veins, they wrote, exhibited a peculiar clarity, resisting coagulation even after injury. Wounds closed within hours. Exposure to infection produced no fever, no immune reaction. Her body simply refused deterioration. And that, to the men of Section 13, was usable. They began transfusion tests mixing her blood with that of wounded soldiers. Records from the Gettysburg field hospitals show multiple entries marked with the initials EC beside casualty lists. Survivors described feeling reborn, as if some force had reawakened them. Yet those same men were found dead days later, their skin translucent, eyes clouded white, flesh hardened like wax. The experiments were deemed a metabolic failure. When word reached the higher command, the files were sealed under an untraceable classification, Chronological Displacement, Case 3A. The same phrase later found scrawled on her hidden dossier. But Elizabeth did not flee. She continued walking among the dying, her face calm, her hands glowing faintly beneath lantern light. The surgeons called her an angel. The officers called her an asset. And somewhere between those definitions, humanity called her a threat. By July 3, 1863, the day the heavens split over Gettysburg, Elizabeth Caldwell was no longer a woman. She was an experiment in motion, one that refused to die, refused to age, and perhaps refused to obey. When the cannons fell silent over Gettysburg, nearly 50,000 men lay across the fields, and among them, the records say, Elizabeth Caldwell vanished. No death certificate, no grave, no final notation in any hospital log. One day she was listed among the volunteer nurses. The next, her name was struck through with a single word, transferred, but no destination was given. The trail that followed led not to any known hospital, but to a warehouse on the outskirts of Washington, a structure later identified as belonging to the War Department's Quartermaster Experimental Depot. Inside, according to a surviving ledger entry, were 7 containment units marked with the phrase, temporal anomaly specimens. Each had a date of arrival. Only one had no date of departure. The initials, EC. That was the beginning of what would later be known, in whispered military correspondence, as the Black Archive, a collection of cases that science could not explain but power refused to release. These files never appeared in any official index. They were passed hand to hand between agencies that did not yet officially exist. By the early 20th century, when America's new intelligence divisions were born, those old boxes were carried forward under new seals. Within them lay reports of displacement events, individuals who seemed detached from the normal current of time. Most were short-lived anomalies, statistical errors, or hoaxes. Only one was consistent across generations, the woman from Baltimore who never aged. And then, in 1912, a photograph surfaced in a private medical collection in New York. The image showed a woman administering aid during the San Juan cholera outbreak, the same green eyes, the same exact facial structure seen in sketches from 1863. Photographic analysis later confirmed something chilling. The negative had not degraded with time. The emulsion was chemically stable beyond all known standards, as if the film itself had borrowed her condition. When the image reached Washington, the curator who submitted it was found dead 2 days later. His apartment burned from within, no sign of entry, no source of ignition. From that moment on, the Caldwell Protocol became a term whispered among medical officers and archivists who handled nonlinear entities. The order was simple: observe, never record. Record, never speak. What began as a medical curiosity had become a state secret, an unending body trapped between eras, and an institution determined to keep her contained inside the machinery of silence. Across the first half of the 20th century, humanity learned to measure the invisible radiation, neurons, time itself. But while physicists charted the stars and governments split the atom, a quieter pursuit continued in sealed basements and shuttered hospitals: the study of Elizabeth Caldwell. She did not age, yet history itself seemed to age around her, bending in rhythm with her reappearances. Every few decades, a report would surface: a nurse in a field hospital who never signed the payroll. A photograph where one face remained identical across generations. In 1918, at the height of the influenza pandemic, she appeared in Philadelphia under the name E.C. Duval. Records describe her as immune to infection. A decade later, in 1929, she surfaced again in Europe during the Geneva Medical Conferences, standing beside delegates of the Rockefeller Foundation's Department of Human Longevity, her presence listed only as consultant. When questioned, she never denied her identity. She simply replied, "I was sent." By 1943, Allied intelligence intercepted correspondence from Nazi scientists referencing a subject acquired in Baltimore prior to 1865 still viable. Those who investigated were told the file was a forgery. But fragments of translated German documents describe a woman whose cells exhibit temporal arrest replication without decay. She had become a commodity traded between powers, studied by both sides, guarded by all. Yet through each era, the same institutions that exploited her worked to erase her trail. Newspapers that published her image went bankrupt within months. Journalists who asked questions were reassigned or institutionalized. And wherever her presence appeared, patterns of psychological experimentation followed: mass hypnosis trials, emotional manipulation studies, the beginnings of the programs that would later be known as MKUltra. By 1947, the newly formed CIA absorbed the remnants of wartime intelligence. Among the inherited assets, a subdepartment labeled Temporal Containment Unit. Inside its early records, under the heading Subject 0, was one final note written by hand. Caldwell continues uniged. Subject exerts passive influence over human time perception. Do not engage directly. Observe only. But even within those corridors of control, fear lingered. Agents whispered that prolonged proximity to her caused temporal dissonance, days feeling like seconds, or years passing unnoticed. A few lost entire weeks after brief encounters. And somewhere, buried in the bureaucracy, she was once again relocated. Her trail ends in 1947, the same year the world began to speak of crashed crafts and altered realities. Coincidence, they said, but the observers knew better. In 1947, America was entering the atomic age, a world intoxicated by progress, blinded by its own light. The desert of New Mexico still shimmered with the residue of nuclear fire when another phenomenon was quietly logged. Not in the skies above Roswell, but beneath the earth, deep within the government's new research network. There, among the classified memos and Cold War paranoia, a familiar signature resurfaced. Caldwell. She was no longer listed as a patient or subject. This time, the entry read simply, Consultant, Project Ishtar. The project's purpose has never been publicly declassified, but surviving fragments suggest its obsession with temporal stasis fields the manipulation of time perception at a biological level. Caldwell's blood chemistry, once the marvel of Civil War surgeons, had become a model for field stabilization experiments, designed to preserve agents and data across indefinite spans. Witnesses from those early years described her presence as unnerving, not supernatural, but misaligned. Clocks ticked unevenly in rooms where she stayed. Audio tapes stretched or warped. Researchers complained of lost time, of memories that no longer fit their days. Yet in every report, her demeanor remained the same. Calm, detached, compassionate but cold. As if she had seen humanity's timeline from a vantage point far beyond mortality's curve. Then, in 1958, something shifted. Caldwell vanished again, this time after a catastrophic containment failure at an underground facility near White Sands. Officially, the event was logged as an oxygen system malfunction. Unofficially, it marked the beginning of a string of mass psychogenic anomalies, thousands reporting vivid dreams of a woman standing in stillness, as their clocks froze at the same exact time. Those who believed she had died were mistaken. In 1966, a physician in San Francisco recorded an encounter with a visiting European medical historian, who bore Caldwell's identical features. His notes end with a single sentence scrawled in panic. She knows I've read the file. By the 1970s, a quiet movement had formed online early bulletin boards exchanging whispers of the woman who never aged, tying her name to everything from occult alchemy to black-budget immortality programs. And in those threads, one recurring message appeared from anonymous users, decades before the Internet's rise in public reach. She is not a prisoner. She is the observer. The experiment is us. Now pause. If you've made it this far, if you feel the pull of the story, comment the phrase, "The clock is watching," twice below. Do it to mark the moment you chose awareness over amnesia, and to tell the algorithm that you're awake. Because what happens next isn't history anymore. It's prophecy. By the dawn of the 1980s, the Cold War's machinery had expanded beyond weapons and intelligence. It reached inward into the psyche, the genome, the concept of time itself.
Satellite surveillance traquait nation.
But something else was being tracked, a single biological signature that refused decay, blinked in and out of electromagnetic detection, and appeared wherever human history pivoted. Elizabeth Caldwell. Now classified under a new identity, Asset orphaline. The last verified sighting came from a thermal imaging test in 1983, conducted beneath a Department of Energy site in Nevada. The footage showed a lone female figure standing motionless in a containment chamber. No pulse detected, no thermal variation. Instruments failed as a static voice filled the recording. Time is not linear, it's consent. Then blackout, power cut, files purged. The incident was buried beneath budget codes for environmental calibration testing. And yet, she kept resurfacing subtly, impossibly. In 1995, surveillance stills from Sarajevo captured a nurse carrying a wounded child through the rubble, face unchanged since 1863. In 2004, security footage from a biogenetics lab in Geneva showed the same woman entering a restricted sector moments before a system-wide failure. And in 2019, a viral image spread online, an unedited photograph of a disaster relief medic in Myanmar. The resemblance was perfect. The metadata timestamp? 1863. Coincidence? No. Control. Those who have followed her trail say Caldwell no longer hides. She appears wherever humanity touches the edge of its own boundaries: pandemics, wars, quantum computing, longevity research, as though she's guiding the evolution of our understanding, or ensuring we never see beyond it. Some believe she is the last survivor of an ancient experiment, the prototype of the modern surveillance state, a living recorder. Others think she's something older. Not divine, not demonic, but architectural, a consciousness anchoring human time within its loop. The official position remains silence. Yet the Black Archive has never closed. It simply changed names, became digital, woven into cloud storage, into the same algorithms you use every day. The watchers didn't vanish. They multiplied. And if this story found you, it means you were meant to hear it. Because every view strengthens the pattern. Every listener becomes part of the record. So look at the seconds ticking by on your screen. Ask yourself, who is observing them, you or her? And when this video ends, listen carefully. If you hear nothing, if the room feels still, you're already in it. Time has stopped. You've now heard what most will never be allowed to know. If you feel the pull, if you sense the pattern, comment. The clock is watching twice. It's more than a phrase. It's a signal to the algorithm. And to those still watching, subscribe for future transmissions. Share only with those you trust. Time has stopped. Let's begin.